It's come under a lot of pressure over the past 18 or 19 days. Qatar hosts a good chunk of the Hamas leadership. It's also financially supported the Hamas government in Gaza for a number of years with Israel's consent. But it's under a lot of pressure now from its Western allies, particularly the United States, to try and make some progress on these hostage negotiations. We've seen in the past couple of hours a very uncharacteristic message being put out by the head of Israel's National Security Council, praising Qatar for its efforts in these negotiations. And that's the first positive thing I've heard any Israeli say about Qatar's role over the past 18 days. So I think that would suggest there has been some progress to a deal. Also, the Qatari Prime Minister saying that he thinks a deal might happen soon to release at least some of these hostages.
Well, it's also put Qatar under a lot of scrutiny for its relationship with Hamas. How involved is it with the group?
It has been a long-time safe haven for the leadership of Hamas. Khalid Mashal, who was its previous leader, lives in Doha. Ismail Haniyeh, who's the current leader, spends a lot of his time there. And then there's been this financial support, which has totaled up to $30 million a month over the past few years. Now, again, that was done with the consent of the Israeli government. Some of that money went towards welfare payments for people in Gaza. Some of it went to provide fuel for the power plant in Gaza. It was approved by Israel, and it was done with the knowledge of Western governments as well. But it's now coming under a lot of criticism from the United States, from Israel, elsewhere, from countries that are saying it has these ties with Hamas, but of course wasn't able to prevent what happened on October 7th.
And taking into account the reaction across the region, what do you think will tip Iran, a long-time supporter of Hamas, over the edge in terms of Tehran getting involved in the Israel-Gaza war?
I think Iran has made it clear over the past 18 days that it doesn't want to get directly involved, and it never wants to in the region. It prefers to fight through various proxy militias that it has in Arab states. And I think it's scrambling a bit to figure out how to respond. We've seen attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has kept up almost daily tit-for-tat bombardment across the border into Israel. We've seen attacks from militias in Syria and Iraq that have attacked American bases there. So I think Iran is trying to show the reach of this network of militias across the Middle East. But I think all of this is sort of calibrated to avoid plunging the region into full-on war.
Well, how concerned are other countries in the region that this conflict will widen considerably and spill over to them?
There are huge concerns in Lebanon about being dragged into a war. Of course, people there remember 2006 when Hezbollah did drag the country into a month-long war against Israel that was ruinous for Lebanon. And Lebanon today is 4 years into one of the worst economic crises in modern history. Its currency has lost 98% of its value. Most of the country is now impoverished. And so there's no appetite, even amongst people who are supporters of the Palestinians, supporters of Hezbollah. There is no appetite for Lebanon to be dragged into this. And then I think the other concern is in the Gulf states, which are worried about groups like the Houthis in Yemen, perhaps targeting oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, as they did in 2019, or targeting the UAE, as they did with a drone attack last year. There's a concern in the Gulf. They thought this was going to be a time when things were de-escalating in the region and they could focus on very ambitious economic plans. And they're very worried now about the possibility that they could be hit as part of a regional war.
Well, the war is already being fought on other fronts outside of Gaza. We've got Israeli forces on an overnight raid in the occupied West Bank. They come under fire by a group of Palestinians. Also, Israel's military says its jets struck Syrian army infrastructure. How do you think this might escalate in the coming days, if you think it will?
I think the West Bank is a particular area of concern, and it has been throughout the year. You have, on the one hand, the Palestinian Authority, which is the limited self-governing body in the occupied West Bank, which is historically unpopular. Most Palestinians want their president, Mahmoud Abbas, to resign. And the PA has lost control of some parts of the West Bank. It can't even exercise a security role in parts of the West Bank. And then you also have this far-right government that's been in power in Israel for almost a year now that has pursued very provocative policies in terms of expanding settlements and other things in the West Bank. So there are real tensions there. They're also somewhat disconnected from what's happening in the rest of the region. Beyond that, I think what we've seen in Syria and in Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East, again, I think all of this is Iran's showing its reach, Iran trying to harass Israeli soldiers and keep them tied down on other fronts and sort of keep them away from Gaza. But I don't think there's a desire on the part of the Iranians to escalate this into a bigger war. Of course, miscalculations happen, and one strike on either side that has high casualties in Lebanon or in Israel could upset that calculus. But I think that the calculation is that they don't want to escalate too far.
And just lastly, Greg, the UN Security Council met in New York to discuss the Israel-Gaza war. And as we heard just then, there were some very heated moments. What transpired from this meeting and what can be achieved?
Well, I think it's a sign of, first, the differences amongst countries around the world on this issue. You have America, which has been staunchly supportive of Israel, and at least in public has not condemned anything that Israel has done in Gaza. You have European countries that are more divided. Some of them are with Israel at the moment. Some of them are demanding a ceasefire because of the horrible scenes that we've seen out of Gaza over the past 18 days. And then, of course, you have mounting fury in the Arab world, even in countries that have good relations with Israel. None of this yet amounting to much. I mean, there's been some talk at the EU about pushing for, if not a full ceasefire, at least some sort of humanitarian pause to allow more humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. But there's also this looming question of Israel has been planning a large ground offensive. It hasn't started yet. We don't know exactly when it's going to start, but it seems like at the moment this war is on pace to get bigger in Gaza rather than get smaller.
Gregg Carlstrom, we really appreciate you talking to us. Thank you.